Greetings, this is Father Michael with our word of the week. This week's word is vocation. Vocation, which comes from the word to call, vocare or vocatio. And in a scriptural or theological sense, vocation is associated with the Good Shepherd, the one who calls to his sheep that he might lead them as they hear his voice and they follow him. Last week we celebrated Good Shepherd Sunday, and so there's a tradition in which, both in a general and specific ways, we open ourselves up to hear the voice of the Lord, to hear the voice of the Good Shepherd, and to respond. And for this reason, this weekend, our 7 Dominican novices, led by Father Anthony Rosevier, who is a novice master, will share their vocation stories with the whole of the parish. Now, it's a great privilege to have the novitiate here. These novices are part of the general Western Dominican province, which goes from Alaska all the way down to Mexicali, Mexico, and all of the different ministries we have here on the West Coast. But here at St. Dominic's, we have the privilege, if you connected to the parish, to have that first year, the novitiate year, the newbies, be here and to be formed in the Dominican way of life and to interact as they're able with the parish. And so as you hear their stories this weekend, to open your ears to 3 aspects of what vocation is all about. First of all, I always love to hear the vocation stories because I find that each vocation story, that is, as each man has heard God's call to them in a specific way, and their response to it is unique. It's like a fingerprint, right? We have unique fingerprints. Every vocation story has a unique way in which God has called and which that person has responded. And hopefully that inspires us to think in our own life, how is God calling me? To what is God calling me to do? How is my unique story of God's call and my response really intentional in my life? Sometimes we get to a place in our life where we have a job, a career, everything's kind of going, and we kind of go on autopilot. And so having this kind of vocation weekend, once again, stimulates and activates that sense of, are we in a daily way, habitually listening for and responding to God's call for his will to be done in my life right here, right now, today? Secondly, it's a kind of consideration that when it comes to specific vocations, that is to ministries of service in the church, we all play a part, right? And I'll mention 2 aspects of this. First of all, there might be young men and women watching this video right now who God is calling to be a priest or to be a religious. I had a priest tell me in college, he says, I think there's an attitude that unless we are bowled over, unless there's a beam of light that comes down like St. Paul and is knocked down, that men and women don't often think God is calling them to be a priest or religious. In other words, there needs to be some miraculous sign that sets a priest or religious off on the path to consider that vocation. And he said, absolutely not. He says, consider the other way around. He says, speaking to young men, he said, if you're a young man and you're available for that consideration, consider that God is exactly calling you to be a priest. In other words, you don't need positive signs that God is necessarily calling you to priesthood. Ask yourself, why wouldn't God call me? Presume that the Lord is calling you to be a priest or to be a religious. And then from that mindset and that intentionality, allow the Lord to call you. It doesn't take a miraculous moment, in other words, to be called in a very specific and powerful way to priesthood, right? So if you're a young man or woman seeing this video, to ask yourself, have I truly considered priesthood or religious life? And perhaps it's not that the Lord is not calling me, it's that I haven't considered that in its fullness. And the second aspect to this is we might say, well, Father Michael, I'm in a place in life where I'm going to be a priest or to be a religious in any way. I'm married, or my vocation in life has already been generally discerned. So this isn't for me. And I would say to the contrary, in some ways, it's all the more important that you have a consideration and a real connection with vocations. I just think of my own story. I'm a priest, I'm a religious, but my vocation story, my ability to listen to the voice of the Lord, to respond to the Lord's call, didn't happen in isolation. My parents, my family, teachers, mentors, the friends that I surrounded me, all of them have a very, very important and essential place in my own story. My parents, my dad isn't a priest, but I wouldn't be a priest without him. Some of my high school teachers who are not Catholic at all, it wasn't that they were going to be a religious or even Catholic, but I wouldn't be a Catholic priest without their encouragement. A tutor at college, one of my professors, an atheist or practical agnostic, as she said, she was willing to write me a recommendation to be a Dominican. I wouldn't be a Dominican without that sense of her influence in my life. And so even if God's not calling you to be a priest or religious, it doesn't mean that you can exempt yourself from that participation in God's call to be a priest, to be a religious, to be of service. There can be no ministries of service in the church, specifically priesthood or religious life, without a support network, without encouraging in every way. So ask yourself this question, not just what is God calling me to do in a specific way, but how is God calling me to be a support and encouragement to those to the Lord who is calling? And this leads to that third point, and that is to pray. Sometimes we maybe should have started with this, but we think of prayer as the last resource of those who can't do something, but it should always be our first instinct. And so save the best for last here. The 7 young men who will give their vocation stories this weekend are on an incredible adventure and journey, and yet it's just the first step. They put on the white habit, but they've made no vows, they've made no promises. Tomorrow they could discern this isn't their way of life and they could walk away and there would be no exemption needed. Or we, as the formators, could say, this life doesn't seem suitable for you, and we could ask them to leave. And there would be no sense of any obligation that's been violated, right? This is just their first step. They haven't even made vows yet. Their vocation is in a most delicate, fragile place. And so we need to pray for them. It's the beginning of, God willing, 8 years of entering into Dominican formation. And so just because they've entered into the Dominicans, that listening and that response to God's call to their vocation continues all the more. And so this is your opportunity to pray for those 7 young men who are living here this year, that they may continue to hear God's voice, that they might continue to respond to that call, that wherever the Lord leads, they might have the courage and the boldness to follow the Good Shepherd in every way. The Lord is always calling us. The Lord is calling you. And ask yourself, are you responding to God's call in a very particular way? Are you helping and encouraging others to respond to God's call in ministry and service? And are you praying for vocation? Let us then, on this weekend, pray to the Lord of the harvest that he will send laborers in to his vineyard, that the Good Shepherd might lead all of us to verdant pastures. Amen.